Um, we are joined now by Christian Gilses, who is going to be our main presenter for today. So thank you all so much for joining. My name is Laura Casaragola. I'm a school gardens coordinator with Grow NYC, and I'm joined by my coworker, Sophia, who does nutrition education with our program. And then I'll introduce and pass it over in just a moment to Christian, who is hot off that New York City commute, running to make this workshop, which we're so glad that he is going to be presenting for us today. If you have questions throughout the workshop, put them in the Q&A function, because that way we'll have a whole list of them that I'll be able to ask Christian at the end. And feel free to still use the chat, but if you really want your question answered, make sure to put it in the Q&A because it makes it easier to filter through the questions. And I think without further ado, you ready to take it over, Christian?
Yes, I am. All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for waiting. Got caught up in a little farm tours. But yes, so if you guys don't know me already, my name is Christian Gilses. I'm a senior at John Brown High School who studies animal culture. I also have a huge passion for urban agriculture and plant science like fruit trees, house plants. If you've attended some of my houseplant workshops with Grow NYC, and all sorts of gardening. So we're gonna get started with my fruit tree extravaganza workshop today. So yes, let's get started. So today you're going to be learning about basic fruit tree care, growing techniques, and a survivor tree nursery at my school, John Brown. And we're just going to take a look at that real quick right now. So you're getting an exclusive tour. So so just a little backstory in case you don't know about these survivor trees. Under all the rubble of the Twin Towers, there was one tree, a calorie pear, that was taken and propagated by Bartlett tree experts. So they specifically made 421 propagations of that tree on ground zero. And these propagations were given, well, first cared for by Bartlett tree experts, but then were given to John Brown for them to take care of, like a little nursery situation by all their students. So the survivor tree is a calorie pear, as I stated, which is an ornamental fruit tree. You're gonna get to see pictures of it in a moment. So this tree obviously holds immense symbolism because it symbolizes determination and perseverance through everything that went down on 9/11, and it just symbolizes a lot of hope for the people who've lost loved ones on 9/11 or actually went through it. So for students like me and my peers at school, we are able to use the survivor tree as a tool of remembrance and being able to empathize with others who went through it. So John Brown High School is the only school in the whole world that is able to keep these trees and care for them. And students are able to work with these trees before they go out to different places of the world, different parts of the country. So we're able to do watering, pruning, which can be a little scary at times when you're pruning such an important symbolic tree, but we get it done still. So a few times a year, places that endured hardships are given a tree as a symbol of resilience and perseverance because they went through this and they're still going to be able to rebuild and go on to the next steps. So places all over the world were given a survivor tree from John Brown. Example is Japan. They were given, specifically Hiroshima was given a survivor tree, and they actually traded a ginkgo with us from Hiroshima. So we have one of those too. But specifically this picture is a picture of a survivor tree memorial in central Louisiana after a hurricane. So these are just the types of memorials that people do when they get their trees. So just lastly, we have some pictures of the survivor trees. The big white flowering tree is the original survivor tree in Ground Zero in New York City when it's in its full glory flowering. Again, a calorie pear. And then we have the propagations, the little saplings. all on the bottom of the slide. So that's how big they are when we're giving them out. So they had a long time to grow, get some more branches, some leaves, and some growth on them. And we make sure that they're healthy before they go on. And we make sure to let the caretakers, the new caretakers know, because a lot of them come in very nervous to take one because they don't want to kill this tree, obviously. And then lastly, that little medallion on the bottom left of the slide is the little medallion that every tree gets, that has the John Bell logo on it, and then also Bartlett tree, so they know that it's the real deal. So now, after we discuss that special introduction, we're just going to jump into fruit trees. I hope you guys are excited. So the first three topics that we're going to cover are what climate can you grow fruit trees in, gender in fruit trees, and some container options. So these are some heavily talked about topics that I wanted to cover in today's workshop. So this is about climate and fruit trees. So you can only grow certain fruit trees in certain climates. So you won't be able to grow tropical fruit trees, hence the title. You can't grow oranges in New York. That just won't work. The certain growing conditions are not adequate in places in cooler temperatures that for tropical growing trees. So in places that get a winter period, the best fruit trees to plant would be trees like cherries, peaches, and plums. Apples are also good because they are made to sustain the cold winter periods. So warmer weather climates, let's say warm for most of the year, like citrus, mangoes, and bananas and papaya won't be good candidates for a cool weather climate because they're not built to survive that winter period, and then they'll die back and not be able to grow back in the cooler periods, in the cooler climates. So the fruits you tend to imagine when you think of a tropical vacation grow best in those conditions. That's just something that I thought of to help you as a little guide. Because when we think of a tropical vacation, we think of mangoes, bananas, those really colorful, just tropical looking fruits. So if you use that as a guide, then you'll most likely get it. Just a quick little tip. So a really important topic also is that you want to know if you need a male or female pair of trees for fruit. A common issue that people run into is that they don't or that they aren't aware that your tree is dioecious, or meaning that if it only has male or female parts. So you think you're going to get fruit and then you don't end up getting fruit for multiple seasons and you're wondering why. I'm doing everything right. And then you realize, oh, I need a second tree in order to get fruit. So if you don't get a male fruit tree and female fruit tree, you will not be able to get any fruit because there's no tree to fertilize the fruit or bear the fruit. So the female tree is the tree that has the flowers with the little tiny fruit attached to the bottom of the flower, which is so that female tree is going to bear the fruit, and then the male tree is the tree that produces pollen in its flowers, which is going to send out the pollen to the female trees and then create your fruit that you're going to harvest. So exactly what I stated, you want to analyze the flowers on your specific fruit tree to see if you have a female or male tree, so you know if you need to get a male or female. So you could also look at the tag on the fruit tree if you don't want to be a little scientist and look at the flowers. So the tag will most likely tell you. So just make sure not to throw out the tag immediately so you don't forget, or you could look at the flowers. Another aspect to think of when you're growing fruit trees is spacing. So even if you do have a male and female fruit tree, if the male is way too far from the female, you're still not going to get pollination and your harvest won't start coming in. So you want to keep fruit trees from 15 to 20 feet. That's just a good guide for you to remember. 15 to 20 feet is good enough for the pollen to reach the trees. But it also varies for certain trees. So if you want to get really specific, you could look at your tree tags and see exactly if you're in a pinch. If you can't do 15 to 20, you could always look at the fruit tags. But you always want to make sure that you don't plant your trees too close, because again, the tree that you get or that you buy right from the garden center or from wherever you're buying them, that's not going to be end result. So they're going to obviously grow way bigger as the seasons go on. So if you plant them too close together, you are going to get the pollination and the harvest. But then when they grow up, you're going to have trees that are way too cramped together, and you're going to have airflow issues and space issues with the branches. Next, one of my favorite topics, because I love finding new ways to grow different plants in small spaces or in urban environments. So container fruit trees. A lot of people don't think that this is possible, but yes, it is. So these are 3 examples that you're able to plant in small spaces. So on I don't know about a balcony if that's too heavy, but if you have a small patio, this would be perfect. Pop a little fruit tree there. So we have figs, which are commonly grown in New York. You could see them everywhere. A lot of people in New York have figs, and they're so good because they don't grow so big, and you're able to easily prune them, and they're a super basic fruit with super easy care. Great for containers. Next, we have lemons. Lemons are actually one of the most common container fruit trees because they're so easy. So citrus like lemons are actually one of the exceptions that you could grow in cooler weather climates. If you bring them indoors during the winter, and they're also super easy to care for. And pears. So pears are the last one. They stay small, easy to care for, and they actually do not need to be brought indoors because they're like apples, and apples in cool weather climates don't need to be brought indoors.
Can I interrupt really quick, Christian, to show I brought my
course.
my container lemon tree.
Oh, I actually have my container lemon too. I'm gonna show you guys at the end of the whole presentation.
Awesome.
Yes,
I just got
your lemon is
excited
so
to show
big. I
and tell.
know. Yes. So just a little tip. So planting fruit trees in containers is a great option for small situations. And the cool thing about container trees is that you think just because you have a sort of miniature, quote unquote, tree that you're going to get smaller fruit. But just because it's miniature doesn't mean that you're going to have smaller fruit. You're still going to have regular size, nice fruit. So a container lemon, you're still going to get your nice harvest. Obviously not as much as a huge tree, but you're still going to get something. And also another tip is that there are miniature versions of a fruit tree, but if you're choosing a regular fruit tree that you want to put in a pot, make sure to stay on top of pruning and also upgrading your pot sizes so you don't dehydrate the roots or are just have a way too big of a tree for a small pot. So now after we went over some trees, and some different fruits and different options and pollination and all of that, what tree is best for you? So size is not the only way to determine what trees are best for a space. You also want to keep in mind of pollination, which we talked about. So fruits like peaches, apricots, figs, and most citrus don't require an additional tree to help pollinate female flowers. So if if you have if you have a small space, then you can't have a container tree, then it's okay, because you could also think about pollination. So you may not want to choose a tree that requires two trees like a female and a male and is dioecious. So you want to choose a self-pollinating tree. So fruits like apples, pears, cherries are not good options because you are going to need to get another tree. And then again, peaches, apricots, figs, and most citrus are good options for containers or small spaces because you don't need more than one tree. You're able to just keep one. So then another little guide for you just to make it easy to remember, non-self-pollinating trees equals two or more, or two for one harvest, because you need two trees for one tree to produce fruit for you to harvest, and that equals more space needed. So quick little guide for you to remember. So now just a general fruit tree care. If you're interested in fruit trees, so this is just the watering, sunlight, fertilization, and season care. First, we have our winter care. So this is part of the season care. When it's the winter, if you're in a winter area, so if you're in a climate that drops down below like adequate weather for your specific tree, then you want to make sure that you're pruning your tree before winter if needed. Most trees or some trees are good to be pruned during the spring, but if you want to take care of that during the winter, then you're able to. Then you just want to make sure that you're on top of that. So in spring, your tree is able to bud up nicely. So it's a better idea to prune during the winter, because then in spring the tree doesn't have to worry about growing buds on branches that you're going to cut off, and then have to regrow those buds. So you want to, if you're dealing with a container tree, then you want to make sure that it's in the proper container for winter to prevent root death from freezing, or water that's in there that's soggy and then that freezes. Or also just to keep in mind is that when you're dealing with a container plant and you're going through winter and you're leaving it outside, to have a pot that's able to sustain winter, because most pots will crack. So that's just a tip for you guys. And lastly, you want to make sure that your tree is well protected. So if it's again a container tree and you're leaving it out in the in the barren cold, then you just want to make sure that you put a little cloth over it, to make sure that the winter doesn't kill it. But most trees can deal with that, and you just want to keep it in the back of your head. Next, we have summer care. So right when your tree's starting to produce, when you're getting some new flowers, some new leaves, you want to make sure that you're spraying your trees for pests. So you don't have to spray with chemicals, but if you choose to do that, then summer or spring is when you want to do that. You could spray with organic sprays also. That's a good option. But you also want to make sure that your tree is protected from harsh sun if it can't take it. So trees are able to get sunburnt. So if you notice that, you could just, I'll talk about it later in this presentation. You could just deal with it, or you could prevent it a little bit we'll talk about it later. um, and you just want to make sure that it gets water often, because you don't want a really dry, dehydrated tree during the summer, because that's when the heat is. So you need to be watering often. And lastly, you want to make sure that your fruits are developing nice, so you don't have to think about different options and solutions for that, if that's necessary. So this is just about fertilizing your trees. So fruit tree help, you're helping your tree grow and produce those fruit by giving it a little boost by fertilizing it. So the fertilizing of your tree gives it a good foundation at the beginning of spring and throughout spring, to just help it grow, put on those leaves so it's not far behind. So it's able to give you nice fruit early on, so you're able to get more harvest out of that tree. So regular fertilization makes your tree stronger and makes fruit more abundant. But you don't have to. Of course, you don't have to fertilize your tree. It's still going to produce, but it's an option. Next, we have watering your fruits. So your plant should be watered every 1 to 2 days once planted to help them get established. That's most plants. So once you plant most plants into the ground or a pot, you want to be watering them so the roots can get established. And if you treat them like already a big established plant, then then the roots will dry out and your tree is going to be struggling. So you just want to make sure that you stay on top of that watering every 1 to 2 days. After that, you could water once a week or 3 times a week when really hot in the late afternoons during the middle of August. That's when you want to be watering 3 times a week. So soggy spells in watering. So you just want to make sure that you're not letting big pools of water at the base of your tree, because that could cause fruit blooms to rot, and then that's obviously you're losing your harvest or your pollination flowers if you're dealing with a male tree. And then that water could also cause the trunk to rot, which is not good. Um, Lastly, watering a little extra when a fruit tree is producing is encouraged, because a lot of the water is going to make an orange extra juicy or an apple all nice and plump, and could leave behind water for the leaves, because you still want your tree to be nice and healthy and have enough water for that too. Next, we have sun for the fruits. So fruit trees need a lot of sun. That's actually how they start producing, and a little bit of sun could actually drastically negatively affect your fruit. because it will leave you no it's because fruit trees need a lot of sun to be able to produce the fruit. So if you leave it with no sun, you have no fruit. So if the sun gets too harsh, again, as I talked about before, you'll see sunburn, and you could actually use a shade cloth. People use shade cloths to put over their trees if it's really bad and it starts affecting your fruit. But you could just cross your fingers, hope for the best of luck next year, and start dealing with it then. But if you want to minimize the amount of sun a space gets, you could put a fruit tree there because they love sun so much. So that's also a nice fun tip. So you could have a shade tree and it produces fruit. So it's like a two-in-one thing. Lastly, we have fruit tree pruning, which is really important. So I came up with a little um, guide for you guys to think about. So it's just fruit. The beginning of each sentence spells out fruit for you to remember. So F stands for forbid unruly branches. So if actually the picture that I put on the slide, I put as a good example because we see that the bottom of the tree is all nice together and then we have just these big branches sticking out. So these branches are carrying a lot of apples, but you want to make sure that that your tree has a nice shape to it if you're into aesthetics, but also just for airflow and disease resistance, all of that. So R stands for rid of any disease. So if you see any branches that have any black spots on the leaves or have aphids or any of that, you could cut those branches out. Next, we have U, or utilizing sharp and clean shears. You want to make sure that you're not using the same shears, or you're disinfecting the shears in between each tree so you're not transmitting any disease, because certain trees are very susceptible to disease, especially like fungal or bacterial disease. And then you just want to use sharp shears so you don't damage any part of the tree and just introduce places for bacteria to start and harm your tree. I stands for improve tree shape. So just like forbid any unruly branches. If you're into aesthetics, again, you just want to improve your tree shape while you're pruning to make it nice if you're using it for a shade tree or as a decoration tree. And lastly, we have T, or train tree branches. So if you have an espalier tree, which is a tree that's flat and that is trained to be flat against a wall, or if you want your tree to point upwards instead of downwards, or if you want your tree to point downwards instead of upwards, all to fit your space needs, then you could train tree branches to be how you want them. So, of course, we have to talk about pests. And the reason why I said this is because you're planting food on sticks. So, pests they're inevitable, they're going to come. So, you want to, again, spray in spring for any fungal or insect pests. You want to cover your fruit with mesh. A lot of people do this now. I've seen it more and more where people put little mesh bags over their peaches or oranges so pests don't come to them and ruin them. So you could do that. If you have a whole bunch of mesh bags, you could recycle them and put them on your trees and then just take them off when you want to harvest your fruit. Lastly, you don't want to create any environments for pests to thrive. So again, the soggy watering and the soggy situations, if you're watering too much at the base of a tree and you see a pond, that's the ideal environment for flies to start coming and all of that kind of stuff that could harm the trunk if it's damaging the trunk. And especially in summer and the warm weathers, that's the soggy situations are ideal for pests. So just going more in depth with the spraying, you want to spray for pests like blight, which is fungal, beetles, aphids, which are very common, and other diseases. So this could either be organic if you choose, which is a good option since you are eating the fruits. And you could cover your fruits with little mesh bags. So again, just covering your fruits with mesh, and you don't want to allow puddles to form. And also a big thing is fruit falling. So if we have an abundant harvest, then a lot of fruit falls, and that's just normal. It happens. But that can attract even bigger pests to start coming to your trees and get used to them, and then start taking fruit off your trees like birds. So you don't want that to happen. Thank you guys for joining me for my fruit tree extravaganza. I have a little joke for you there. You're welcome. You're welcome. If you have any other further questions, you could reach out to me at Classical Moo on Facebook and Instagram. My email is there, my website. I hope you guys enjoyed yourself. Now it's time for the Q&A section of the workshop.
All right, thank you so much, Christian. That was a lot of awesome information. And we do have about 35 questions in the Q&A right now. So we'll see how many we can get through in the next half hour or so. But I will, what is
Yes,
that?
this is my lemon tree. I started it from seed.
Oh my God. Very cute. Mine is a little different because it only grew one, it's like one stem, so it's not bushy at all. I just let it go straight up tall.
That's nice.
So the pruning really does change the whole plant.
Yes.
So I'll tell everyone we are just another thing. We are recording this workshop, and you'll get an email tomorrow with the recording. And I think we can also send the slides as well. And then if we don't get to your question, or you can't stay until 6 o'clock today, also one of the additional resources is something that Christian found, which is a 100-page resource from the Cornell Cooperative Extension on how to grow fruit trees in the Northeast climate. So that is going to be, that has like all the info on what shape your pruning is supposed to take and what companion plants are good for, you know, very specific varieties and cultivars that work well together, and pollination, all of that. So we'll leave you with the information you need, but let's get started in on these questions because we got a lot to get through. All right, first one from Torrance. I have 3 baby pawpaws and the deer and groundhogs keep eating them. What can I cover the pawpaw babies with to stop them? And some other people had questions about the pests and things.
Yeah. Okay, that's super cool. Pawpaws are becoming more popular now. They're a wild tree. I heard that they're like pudding-ish. They're interesting. But for deer, you could introduce or plant plants like mint and very fragrant plants around the trees to deter all the deer. I know that works with a lot of hostas or other plants that people don't want to get eaten. But also for insects, you could introduce other insects like ladybugs or lacewings or praying mantises that are beneficial for your garden around your trees to help deal organically with all of your insect pest issues.
All right. And I think the mesh bags that you were mentioning would work pretty well for some of those too. Although,
yeah,
I've heard groundhogs can be pretty persistent. All right, Rachel has a question. I have a less than 1-year-old Rainier cherry on my balcony on the Lower East Side, and I'm worried about the winter. What do you recommend to protect it during harsher, colder weather?
I would suggest putting a mesh cloth over it just to prevent the frost from really getting into it, from getting on the leaves and really freezing out the branches since it is really young. If it's possible, you should bring it in if you can, but if not, that's fine. It should be able to endure the winter pretty good with the mesh cloth. Other than that, I would suggest stay on top of watering because just because it's winter doesn't mean that you don't want to water, but not every week. But I mean, like once a month, still water, check on it, make sure that the leaves aren't or that the branches aren't too dry and that it's still doing good. But yeah, my biggest bet would be the mesh cloth.
Great, thank you.
And
and I
also really quick,
will, oh yeah.
yeah, just making sure that it's in a good pot because if it's in a smaller pot than it needs, then the cold is able to better penetrate the roots, which is not good for your cherry.
Good to know. I'm just gonna, a couple people in the chat suggested some things about the deer and the pawpaw question. So I'm just gonna say them really quick. This is from Chrissy Ward, one of our colleagues. I think tree guards are a good bet to help with the deer problem. So putting a tree guard around it. And then Joseph was saying, as the pawpaw tree grows, trim the bottom branches until the deer can't reach the pawpaws. Pawpaws have a lovely shape, and trimming off the bottom branches will enhance it. So there's a little crowdsourced information as well.
Nice.
Pam is wondering, how do you know what fruit trees are good for your area? I'm from North Carolina.
Okay, so what I believe North Carolina, not so great with geography, is similar to New York, right? In
I
weather,
think it would be warmer there. So they
because it's
might
more
have,
south.
yeah. So
Yeah,
I would say it's a good that you're noticing that, you're in a different climate zone than New York,
yes.
where this workshop is tailored more to that. But a lot of similar, it's still the East Coast. So
Hmm.
there's probably a lot of overlap, but you'll just have your growing seasons are different. You might even have a longer growing season for your fruit. So that could help. But I would just do some research. And most states have these cooperative extensions, which are, they do research on what works best in your area. So you can look for resources from agricultural universities from North Carolina and things like that to find more information.
Yeah.
Um, Peter's asking if you have a suggestion of a sweet cherry variety. And I will also say, if you don't have a variety off the top of your head, that's one of the things I noticed in the guide from Cornell that we're going to share out. They had an entire
Yes.
table filled with sweet cherry varieties that you can grow in New York. So
Yeah.
we'll send that in the follow up because there's a lot. I don't know them off the top of my head.
Okay.
Okay, so Christian, are you familiar with cedar apple rust?
No,
Me
but
neither.
I'm a little bit familiar with rust, the disease.
Okay,
Um, yeah, what's the question?
so they're just they're looking for a fruit that is immune to cedar apple rust.
Oh yeah. Definitely the Cornell um
Yeah,
resource.
that's a
Good
hard
for you.
question. Um, okay, so they're asking as well, can pineapples grow outside in New York City? They
So
just
pineapples
planted it.
cannot, oh, okay. Pineapples cannot grow outside in New York. They are a tropical fruit. Yeah, so I would suggest bringing it in for the winter. They don't get huge, so it's like another house plant for you during the winter, and then you could bring it outside during the spring and summer.
Cool. So someone's asking about how to prune apple trees, peach trees, and plum trees. And I'll say that you touched on it a little bit, and that Cornell guide also has diagrams for each fruit tree on what shape you're supposed to prune them in. So that would be something I'd recommend um, looking up tomorrow when we send you the email, the follow-up email.
Yes.
Someone's asking, are there different types of plum trees?
There are different types of plum trees. Yeah, so if you want to have dioecious plum trees or self-pollinating plum trees, you could choose through there. There's disease-resistant plums. But just to touch on the pruning, I do have some tips. You want to make sure that your tree doesn't bloom on new wood or old wood. And you also want to take into consideration how far you're taking it back. You don't want to take your tree back too much. And also pruning under a bud helps. Yeah, that's
Okay,
some of the tips. Yeah.
awesome. So I'm seeing in the chat, we have some more crowdsourced answers. Someone is saying you can grow almost anything outdoors in North Carolina except
Mhm.
citrus. So that person is from North Carolina and Virginia. Uh, Amy Rowe is saying rust and cedar apple rust are the same thing. So that's good to know.
Mhm.
Let's see. And if people have more questions, put them in the Q&A. I am reading down that list. So we're hoping to get to everyone, but we'll see how far we get. So if you have more questions, you can keep putting them in there. All right. So this one is tricky. Can mulberry trees really change their gender? I heard this somewhere. I've never heard of a tree changing from having from being a male tree into a female tree, but maybe someone knows.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one stumps me. I don't know. Um, If you live in New York, can you bring a dwarf banana plant inside along with your lemon and lime trees?
Yes, you can. You definitely want to bring in your bananas inside, because bananas are one of the most tropical um, trees out there. They need humidity and heat. That's what they thrive off of. So I definitely recommend bringing it in with your lemon and other fruits.
Mhm. Okay, this is kind of similar to the pest question, but some other types of animals that are being pests. How to keep
Yes.
squirrels, raccoons, and birds from eating all the hardy kiwis when they're still tiny. Hundreds of tiny
Mm,
green kiwis disappear overnight each spring. So I wonder
yes.
which of the prevention methods you had would work best for those animals that have like little hands and beaks.
It could be so frustrating. Um, Again, the mesh could help with the birds. You could also do like a little wood structure around your tree. I know that that's helped with some. If you don't have like a whole bunch of trees, if you have just like a couple, then you could do like a wood structure because that stumps the squirrels sometimes or the bigger mammals. But squirrels, they're so stubborn. It's really difficult. I know kind of like the guard, the tree guard that somebody mentioned in the chat. You could try that around the trunk of the tree so they get surprised when they're trying to climb up. If you don't have any structures around the tree that they could just jump onto the tree from. That's really all I could think of. Yeah.
Yeah, the squirrels are very persistent. Yesterday, one jumped
Darn.
onto my balcony and dug up my arugula plant for no reason. They don't like arugula. Okay, this is an advanced question. Does it matter when you introduce a cross-pollinating plant in order to cause the cross-pollination? For example, could you introduce a cross-pollinator in a tree's second or third season and expect fruit to grow, or does it have to be introduced right away?
You could introduce a pollinating tree in the second or third season. That's no issue. It should definitely work, and you could actually experiment and try different cross-pollinating trees to get hybrid fruits.
Ooh, that's cool. Is there a best season to introduce a cross-pollinator?
I would say spring, like right at the beginning.
Right.
But yeah, just the warmer months is when the trees
Yeah.
are producing the flowers. So yeah, just the beginning of the growing season for your climate.
Okay. So this question, I'm not sure if we'll have the answer for, but where would you recommend sourcing fruit trees for establishing a small orchard? So they want more trees than just, a couple for a garden. They want to actually start a small orchard. And
Mhm.
so I'm starting to think like they at that point you might just want to learn how to graft.
Yes,
Um,
grafting is a great option.
yeah, because in that
Or
case,
even if you start your own little saplings, you that's definitely an option if you buy one tree and then over time, if you have time, you want to experiment a little, propagate your main tree and make little trees.
yeah. And for grafting, I've never done it myself, but we do have grafted trees at our teaching garden on Governor's Island, and you can get a cutting of a fruit tree, and then it kind of jump starts the process. So you graft it, you attach it, and it starts to grow onto an existing trunk of a tree. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure how that goes, all the specifics. So Alexis, one of our school gardeners in the Bronx, is saying they have a pear tree, but the pears taste a bit bland. It's fairly new. We planted it about 4 years ago. Is there anything we can add to it in terms of fertilizer to enhance the taste of the fruits, or will it get better as the year passes? I don't know if my internet is going or
Yeah, we
if
we cut
yours
out
is.
there for a little bit.
Oops. Did you get the question? Should I repeat it?
Yes, yes, please.
Okay. So they have a pear tree, but it tastes a bit bland. It's fairly new. They planted it about 4 years ago. Is there anything they can add to it in terms of fertilizer to enhance the taste of the fruits, or will it get better as the years pass?
I heard that that the flavor of the fruit tree doesn't get better. So I would say that you can try different fertilizers and additives to amend your soil around it to see if your fruit tree tastes better. Also, water also affects your fruit tree because the more water it's getting, the more diluted the sugars in the fruit get. So maybe try and experiment in cutting down with water during the growing season of your tree to see if the sugar increases in your fruit.
And speaking of fertilizer, someone also asked, what kind of fertilizer do you recommend? Like a compost or like a special fruit liquid fertilizer, anything specific?
Yeah, so fruit specialized fertilizers are best for your tree. Compost is also great if you make your own compost. That's great. Again, you just want to follow the the three basic fertilizer rules.
Great. Um, Someone's asking, where can I buy container plants that are economic to my pocket? So I guess low cost container plants. And I would say Christian and I just planted ours from seed, from
Yes.
like a lemon from the grocery store. So that's
Yeah.
pretty low cost.
Yes.
Okay, let's see. Does anyone know if pawpaws are self-pollinating? I don't know. Okay, we're not sure. We'll have to, that's one for Google then.
Yes. Pawpaws are becoming increasingly more popular. I have to do more research on them.
Yeah, and I believe they're a native plant to this climate as well. I think I heard that.
Yes.
Um, okay, this is interesting. What are some things that can hurt a tree that we should avoid?
Um, in what sense? Like whether I would say
I think in terms of
definitely.
I think in terms of care, like maybe
Oh, okay.
could they overwater it or like put it in the wrong place or
Hmm.
like yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so overwatering is definitely a great way to slow down the progression and growth of any plant. So overwatering in fruit trees affects negatively affects the flowers, the fruit, because it'll cause some rot, some of those issues, yellowing of the leaves, which then the leaves can't make their energy from photosynthesis, and then that's not good for the tree. So definitely overwatering. Um, Over fertilizing is another one. You don't want to over fertilize your
Mm,
tree. That's when you have an increase, an overabundance in nutrients in your tree, and then the leaves start dying back, and you don't want that because then your fruits can't develop, and then your tree can't bounce back next season with enough energy. So yeah, I
yeah.
would say those two tips.
Okay, so this person says, I know this is dependent on the tree type, but are there beneficial companion plants, shrubs, or trees that go well with fruit trees?
Yeah. So your basic pollinator flowers or your herbs are great to put under or around your fruit trees because they're just attracting all the types of um, beneficial insects of the garden. So as
Hmm,
many beneficial insects that you could get are good for your fruit trees because that means more pollination and better fruit growth and harvest sizes.
great. I'm not sure if this question came before or after the slide on this, but how do you, can you just summarize, how do you determine if a tree is female or male?
Yeah. So you want to determine if a tree is female or male by the flowers that they produce. So males will produce flowers that produce pollen and pollen only. So you're going to typically see female trees with female flowers that have a tiny little miniature fruit attached to the bottom of the flower. So that little miniature fruit is what's going to turn into your bigger fruit once it's pollinated. So it's like a little oval bump under the flower, which is your key indicator if you have a female tree, a male tree, or both.
Great. So Chrissy from the City Parks Foundation works in the Bronx Learning Garden, and they have a cherry tree that produces lots of cherries, but there's just one. And so she's wondering if there are cherry tree cultivars that don't need a second tree to fertilize. Or she's wondering maybe there's another cherry tree in the neighborhood that is cross-pollinating it. Um,
Yeah, so there are cherries that are self-pollinating, but that also could be a possibility. There's a lot of cherry trees in New York, lots of different cherry tree species. So that could 100% be a possibility. And if so, then you're lucky. That's good for you, and hope you get more cherry harvests.
awesome. What do you recommend for protecting tree from pests or blight?
Yeah, so blight, I would definitely recommend lots of airflow, and staying on top of monitoring your trees. So we talked about pruning earlier. So more tips is thinning out your plant. So getting rid of all of the first letter F in the fruit guide for pruning. You want to get rid of anything unruly in there to increase airflow to prevent any bacterial or fungal pests like blight. So just getting rid of little branches on the main trunk of your tree to give space for the bigger branches on your main trunk to be able to grow. Um, yes. What was the second part of that question?
I think that was it. It was from
Okay.
pests or blight. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And
Okay.
then kind of related, someone's asking, is neem oil spray okay to use to prevent apples from becoming shriveled and funny shaped?
Yes. Neem oil is 100% good. You just want to make sure to wash your fruits well before eating.
Okay. Um, the leaves of our cherry tree seem to get dry and fall off in summer. What could be happening?
So it could either be a watering issue where there's not enough water being given, or I would say maybe sunburn, too much sun if it's a younger tree, um, or maybe a pest, because there's a whole bunch of different options of pests that you could be dealing with. Mites are big, spider mites. They're very common in houseplants and also in fruit trees. You may be dealing with a really small pest that's eating your leaves, so you want to definitely take a look at that and monitor. So the next coming season, and try and stabilize your watering, keep it consistent, not too often, once a week. For sun, you want to make sure if it's a young plant, keep it well covered to keep it safe to prevent the leaves from drying out, or increase the sun, or and lastly the pest issue, just monitoring your leaves, making sure that there's nothing small that you need to correct with sprays.
And we're getting some questions about sprays. So is that like the neem oil spray, or are you also thinking about some other type of insecticide spray for fruit trees that people could buy at a hardware store or garden store?
Yeah, so these are different insect control sprays. Neem oil is a great option for all of your fruit tree pest needs. But there's different insecticides, fungicides, miticides, all different options for sprays that you could specifically buy for whatever issue you have.
Awesome. Um, another question we have, they're looking for advice because they're just starting out growing fruit trees. So what fruit tree would you recommend they start with? What's an easy one that's good for beginners?
I would say because I've had this one for so long, a lemon is a great option. Depending on what climate you're in. If you're in a cooler weather climate, I would say a lemon's great. If you want to do fruit trees long term, if you have space for them, you could do an apple. Very simple, very good success with apples in New York, depending on the year. If you're in a warmer weather climate, I would say citrus are one of the easiest to grow. Yeah, once they're established.
I've been having good luck with fig trees I've been seeing a lot of good fig
Yes,
trees
it's the
around
scents.
or especially like in New York City. And those ones are nice because you only need one plant.
Exactly. Yes,
So
I forgot to mention figs
yeah,
are a
I'm
great
a fan.
option.
Yeah. Um, someone is asking if I can share the Cornell doc right now because they don't want to wait till tomorrow. I can work on that and put it in the chat. Okay. Um, okay. I mean, this is an interesting one. I don't know. Okay, so can you mention some facts that relate fruit trees to environmental justice? That's an interesting question. I mean, one way, I guess, is that by growing our own fruit, we are, taking control of our food supply. Um,
Hmm.
and so that's kind of great for like food access and food justice to just grow your own food and your own fruit. Um, that's a good question. Another way it relates to environmental justice is that a lot of fruit trees, especially the native ones like the pawpaws, um, and things like that, they are good for the environment. They support, a lot of other local plant and animal species as well as humans.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Christian, what's your favorite type of tree?
That's a really hard one. I would say that a couple of my favorite fruit trees are the ones that I sadly can't grow here in New York. Like I would love to grow a whole bunch of citrus, like grapefruits, oranges, stuff like that. I want to try and grow figs, here in the cooler weather. Let me think my favorite one, if I had to pick. I guess I would say lemons, or limes, because I love limes. I love limes so much, and they're so easy, and I'm having success growing them here. And I know that that you're able to prune them pretty small and still get harvest. So I would say lemons or limes.
Great. We have a couple more minutes left. We got through a lot of questions. I don't think we're going to get to all of them today. Uh, but let's see what we have next. How do you know what's the perfect pot for our desired fruit tree?
The the perfect, what was it?
Like the pot or like a good sized container, I think they
Oh,
mean.
okay. Okay. So you wanna always, just a rule of thumb for potting up plants is that you wanna have 1 to 2 inches or 2 to 3 inches extra growth, um, extra space for the growth of your fruit tree. So if you have like a 2 gallon tree, then you could give it a 3 gallon pot. I was saying 2 to 3 inches because I'm so used to houseplants. But just an extra couple gallons or a gallon if you're dealing with big fruit trees to grow. Always want to have the extra growth.
Okay. For indoor fruit trees, do you recommend grow lights?
Yeah, 100%. I actually have my lemon tree under grow lights with all my other
Oh,
houseplants in my indoor greenhouse, and it loves it. So yeah, but grow lights are not necessary if you don't want to.
okay. Let's see, I think we have time for one more question, maybe. Oh, I don't know how to choose. Uh, but I did just put the guide in the chat there. So if people have more questions, check out that guide. Do apple seeds always grow trees that are different than the tree they came from? And that's something we talked about a bit in our seed saving workshop. Um, and it is true that it's kind of like a random lottery. You never know what you're going to get from an apple. The seeds can have different genetic material inside of them than the parent tree. So you could get the same one, but more likely people just get crab apples from those ones. All right, I have one more good one from Jeannie, one of our school gardeners. Do fig trees, do you need to prune and wrap them in burlap for the winter?
A lot of people prune and wrap them in burlap. You don't have to for the burlap, but you should prune your fig trees if you don't want them to get gigantic. Because fruit trees grow so much during the growing season, especially in New York. So you could prune them all the way back to the base if you want. You could prune them halfway. Just prune as much as you want on a fig, and then you could wrap them if the root, the base of the plant is really exposed because of how much it grew, or if it's nice and level with the ground, then you don't have to wrap it.
Awesome. All right, we are at 6 o'clock. So I think that'll be the end of the questions for today. I did see some questions about how can you have a mini greenhouse and things like that. And so I'll mention Christian has done other workshops for us, specifically about house plants. And he does a great tour of like his indoor mini greenhouse that he grows all of these amazing plants in. Christian, do you have a count for how many plants you have in your greenhouse at
Yes.
this point?
Yes, I have around 40 houseplants right now.
Awesome. So we'll send you an email tomorrow. It will have the recording of this workshop. It'll have the slides. It'll have the follow-up additional resources, which will be that Cornell fruit tree growing guide. We can also link to our distance learning site that has our past workshops that Christian has led for us. And you can see all his information here as well to follow up. So we're getting a lot of love in the chats. Someone's saying they feel like they're really into fruit trees now. So I think that's a great compliment. Thank you all for joining us and have a great rest of your night.
Thank you, everybody. Nice
Thanks,
to see you
everyone.
again.
Bye.